I spent the last 3 weeks studying every single song in NF's new album Hope, and I believe that I've broken down the simple different formulas he uses for getting his signature sounds, from sad songs to hard trap beats to pop melodies. And if you follow these simple steps, not only will you know how he does it, but you will be able to do it yourself too. So let's get started. I've divided the songs in this album into 3 different categories: sad, melodic, and hard. The first group we'll deconstruct is this one. And we're going to start with Suffice, Turn My Back, and Let 'Em Pray. The reason I'm going to break these 3 down at once is because while these melodies sound very different, they share 3 basic simple rules you can follow to achieve hard sounds like these. Let's start with Suffice. The first thing you should notice here is that this is a very simple melody, using a small number of notes. And the second thing you'll notice is that it appears to use this specific note a lot. I wonder if there's a reason why. This melody was made on a minor scale on a 165 BPM. Next, we have Turn My Back. Again, you'll notice this is a very simple melody, but this time using way more notes. Also note that this one seems to use these closed notes a lot. Remember that, they'll be important later. This melody was made on a harmonic minor scale on a 128 BPM. Lastly, Let 'Em Pray. This one is a bit more complex, using about all the notes of the minor scale in just 2 bars. This melody was made on a minor scale on a 102 BPM. Now, I know all these melodies sound and look very different, but it's all in the small similarities. For example, notice how Suffice's melody starts with the first bar on the 3rd note of the scale. Well, so does Let 'Em Pray. Now notice how Turn My Back starts on the 5th of the scale. Well, so does the 2nd bar of Let 'Em Pray. That's because all these 3 melodies are following the basic music theory principle of up and down beats. And that is our rule number 1. Downbeats refer to the beats in your piano roll that start groups. And in 4x4 music, which is most music by the way, those are the 1 and 3. These beats are more noticeable to our ears, and because of that they usually like to have chordal notes in them. I'll explain that in a second. And upbeats means the beats inside of groups, which in this case are the 2 and 4. These are more suitable places for non-chordal notes, or more dissonant notes. And this is important for making melodies like this one, because if you look closely, you'll see that most of these notes in each of these 3 different melodies follow that exact rule. They're all using the notes of this chord, which is our tonic chord. Now, why this chord? Because the 1 chord or tonic chord is the first chord of the scale. It has a feeling of release or home. This brings a necessary stability to a melody that otherwise plays with dissonance and instability as much as it can. That's why you use the 1 chord here. You can make this chord by placing a note on the 1st of your scale, skipping 2nd, note on 3rd, skipping 4th, and placing a note on 5th. This is called a triad chord, and all 7 chords of the major and minor scales are built like this. Now, trap melodies don't always use this single chord to build their melodies. What Butterfly Effect does is again use our very simple and classic 1-2 progression. To build the chord, simply put notes on 1 and 2 of your scale and skip note, skip note. But when they use more chords, they always include the 1 chord as a stability point. Okay, so now we know why these notes are here. But what about the other ones? Well, there's actually another very basic music theory principle that explains why these notes are here. You see, in this album, NF's producer Tommy Profit played a lot with the simple concept of non-chord tones. The principle of non-chord tones basically shows us that when going from a chordal note to another chordal note, there are 4 main pathways you can take. The first one is called passing tones. This can be seen here, for example. When going from one chordal note to another, you can simply use the middle scale note as a passage to nicely land on your target note. Another one is the neighbor tone. This one can be seen here. It basically means that when going from one chordal note to the next, if both the target and the initial notes are the same, you can use the scale note either directly above it or directly below it as a nice sounding neighbor between them. And the last one is basically the same principle, but it's called the double neighbor tone. This is a more complex maneuver that can be seen here in Turn My Back's melody, where it goes first to the next note up, then to the next scale note down, only to then land on the target note. And you can of course do it the other way around. There's one last one, but it's not used in any of these 3, so I'm gonna skip it. And if you pay attention, you'll notice that this non-chord tones principle is used in pretty much all notes of this progression, also in this progression and in this progression. So with that, we can start seeing a very simple pattern. First, use the notes of your one chord, especially in your downbeats, which are here and here. Second, try not to have more than 2 non-chord tones between each chordal note, which means you're gonna wanna have a lot more chordal notes than this, more like this. And third, use non-chord tones to connect them. So basically what you want most of the time is chordal note, non-chordal note, chordal note, non-chordal note, and so on. Of course you can and should deviate from this, but keep these 3 in mind when making your next melody. Now you might have noticed that some of the notes in this and in NF's melody were labeled as other. Well, that's because there's a second part to this rule, and that is minor second intervals. That refers to these spaces here. The small tonal differences between these 2 notes makes it so that it helps a lot with adding that evil feeling. So whenever you see a note labeled other, like here, chances are this note is going to be part of one of these groups. So with these 3 rules in mind, here are some example melodies I made. Of course, these 3 guidelines are not enough to make good melodies. You still need a lot of creativity and to break the rules a few times. But these concepts can be really helpful, especially if you ever find yourself stuck in a melody or get beat block. And if you want to never forget them again, I've made a downloadable file with explanations of every single technique we'll talk about today and much more. But more on that later. Bullet is one of the 5 main sad songs in the album. It's made from a simple 3-chord progression made in the F-sharp minor scale on a 165 BPM. As opposed to the first 3 trap melodies, this one is pretty much only a chord progression without top melody, because that role is occupied by the vocal sample. Now, even though this is a whole different thing from this, it doesn't mean we can't find the key components behind it. So let's start with the melodic motion. Also, real quick, before I explain this further, like you saw before, the triad is made from a tonic, a third, and a fifth. So if you have a note here that needs to be in the chord, you have 3 options on what to do. This, or this, or this. Also, by the way, if your chord is in the normal position, it's called root position. If your third is in the bass, it's called first inversion. And if your fifth is in the bass, it's called second inversion. That'll be important later. And also, last thing, there are 7 notes in a scale. Each one is a scale degree. So there are also 7 triad chords in a scale. This is the 1 chord because it uses the first scale degree as a root. This is the 2 chord because it uses the second scale degree as a root, and so on. And these chords produce different feelings. For example, the 6 is sad, the 5 is tense, and so on. Don't forget this is very important. Okay, so our main notes here are the F sharp, A, and G sharp, or scale degrees 1, 3, and 2. These are the notes that are going to give us that victorious emotional feeling. All other notes are only here to complement this main 3 and not change the overall feel. Just make it deeper. Scale notes 1, 2, and 3 always create a nice satisfying conclusion and build-up, and you will hear these 3 all over NF's album, especially in the emotional melodies. Complementing this with the 6th chord adds to this note a bit of sadness. As you know, the 6th chord is the saddest one in the minor scale in my opinion. A similar sound is achievable with the tonic replacing 6, but using the 6 makes it a bit softer. Moving on to the 3 chord is necessary because you have this shared note and this nice interval movement in the other 2. If we replace this with the tonic chord, for example, the change is much more harsh and rough sounding. Lastly, finishing on 7 is a nice way to add some tension while resolving our initial 1-3-2 movement. You can hear here how the progression begs to start again, but at the same time we have our nice little complete tones here. The benefit of this is having a simple arsenal of building blocks you can use for each different feeling. So if you want to make a hard, sad, pop progression like NF does, you don't have to start from 0. Now you might think that this will lead all your songs to sound like copies. Well, this is a MIDI from NF's song Mistake. Sound familiar? Well, this song uses the exact same building blocks as Bullet, for example. Every day, millions of artists are using the exact same building blocks to create very different songs. The only difference is that you will have these building blocks at the palm of your hand while the other artists are simply stumbling upon them after clicking around. So you will have more energy to innovate from this point while they still think this idea was original enough. And how will you do it? Well, I present to you the NF file. This contains a MIDI kit with 15 NF style ideas I came up with using the formulas from this file. A sample pack that I used these MIDIs on, which you can use royalty free by the way, and most importantly, an Excel file. Don't worry, you don't need Excel to open it, you can just use Google Sheets, which is completely free for anyone to use. This will let you look at all the formulas and starter ideas from this album at once. There's a single line for every song that contains first basic info, and then most importantly, the chords that were used, in which order, and what the building notes were, along with an exclusive YouTube video explaining why it works. This tool will help you come up with chord progression ideas. For example, if you want to make a sad progression, well then here you have a bunch of starter formulas that work. And if from here you still need help, then this here will show you which chords were used most often. In sad melodies, for example, it's these three. And this one will help you with the inversions. For example, gospel melodies use inversions to go up, tragic melodies go up then down, and so on. And lastly, of course, the MIDI file of each song in the album. If you're interested in this, check the link in the description to learn more. Anyways, moving on. Running is another one of the 5 main sad songs in the album. It's made from a classic acoustic guitar 4-chord progression in the D minor scale on 144 BPM. Our main notes here are D, A, E, and F, or scale degrees 1, 5, 2, 3. This creates a satisfying progression of notes because the tension created in this 5th interval is increased by this nice fall into the 2nd degree. And from here, the same principle we talked about in Bullet applies. That one about 1, 2, and 3 scale degrees. And making this scale degree a 6th chord helps us establish the sadness because, as you know, the 6th chord in a minor scale is the saddest one. Moving to the 3 chord instead of the 5 or 1 helps us maintain the same interval as we had for this chord, because both are major, and maintaining form like this is a big topic in guitar melodies. That's why we couldn't use the 1 here, for example. Besides maintaining form, moving perfect intervals in guitar melodies is a classic move and it's done all the time. By perfect intervals, I mean of course moving 4 or 5 scale notes up or down. Moving to the 7th chord helps us fall from that high interval jump we had earlier, but also demand more movement because the 7th chord creates tension, as you know. Also, going from chord 6 to 3 to 7 is very common in sad melodies, especially in the pop genre, so you're gonna wanna remember these. And of course, to resolve the tension that the 7th chord creates comes a 1 chord. This serves as a resolution for the progression and also a nice transition to the 6th chord because of these shared notes. Gone is one of the 3 songs of this album I put in the category of melodic. It's made from a 3-chord pop progression in the D minor scale at 80 BPM. This one uses a very classic 5 to 3 main note progression. Starting on a 1 chord adds a tonic, stable feeling perfect for what comes next. Moving on to an inverted 3 chord creates a nice tonic variation. Still sounds tonic, but now the 7th scale degree is in the bass, making it sound a bit more tense and interesting. This technique right here is often used in pop melodies because they make simple progressions sound more complex and rich. Moving to the 6th chord serves not only as a nice resolution of the tension we had in this 5th scale degree to the 3rd or F, but it continues the nice tonic feeling. All of these 3 chords have a tonic harmonic function with little tension except a bit for this part, which creates a smooth flowing, nice sounding progression. And the tempo and rhythm makes sure this sounds vibey and pop-ish. Also, the inversion on the 6th chord does not change the overall feel. It could be in root position and still give up the same vibey resolution of the 7th tension. In fact, I think it sounds better like this because it allows this 7 to resolve down nicely. Now, I know there are still 6 songs left in the album, but this video has already gotten way longer than I expected originally. So if you're interested in hearing my video explanation for the other 6 songs in the album, they will be linked in the downloadable file in the description, along with all the other benefits we talked about, including the full MIDIs, the 5 tools, and the sample pack. Thank you for watching, and if you haven't seen the video I made on the Hope single, you can watch it here. See ya.